All right, and that forms the basis for our discussion this morning. It's now 20 minutes after 7, and it's the political point. And since the handshake took place, of course, there's been mystery surrounding that handshake, and hopefully that mystery is getting clearer, as now we have a 14-member team that was selected and announced. And of course, details still coming out scantily. But as you've heard from that particular story, we have some quarters that are not pleased with that list or are not satisfied, and also are claiming that possibly that list is not all inclusive. And to have that conversation, joining me in studio, we have Honorable Uhuru-Raila. Thank you for joining us this morning. And Honorable Joshua Kotuni, thank you for joining us this morning. Gentlemen, let's start with, first of all, the list that was released, I think it was on Monday yesterday, on Sunday. And I'll start with you, Uhuru-Raila, on your thoughts of that composition, first of all. A number of people there, like Amos Wako, of course, are politicians that have been known for a while, but there are other names that possibly to many Kenyans may be new. But your thoughts on the list?
Thank you, Michael. I think the first thing I would say is that a lot of us are trying to criticize something that we may not understand. I don't know how many Kenyans understand what that list is supposed to do. Most of us are already very clear. We do not actually know what the handshake deal is all about.
Including those of you possibly within the party.
I mean, including those of us within the party. The president and the former prime minister have been quite clear that this is a process that they are working on, that they're going to release at the appropriate time. Those of us in Parliament are hoping that it's going to be on tomorrow during the State of the Nation address. We will be told exactly what it is that is happening. So when you start criticizing and saying that the team that has been formed is not representative, then the question you're asked is representative of what? Because if we don't know what they're actually supposed to be dealing with, we know it's a unity team. Where I come from, in our culture, the people who go to actually discuss cohesion and peace issues are actually older people. I'm hearing people saying there are no other people in that team. And it's not because it's disrespectful. It's just, remember we're an African culture. So yes, it would have been nice to see a couple of younger faces there. But again, you come back to the point of nobody actually knows what the mandate of this particular group is. You don't know what their job description is.
Are you, as a member of Jubilee, comfortable with the fact that there is something going on that you're not privy to, yet it's supposed to unite us?
The thing about leadership is that there is always going to be something going on that some people know and some people do not know. I think the question to ask yourself is whether it's affecting your ability to do what you're supposed to be done. I mean, as a member of Parliament, I am legislating, I'm representing the people who put me in Parliament, I am doing oversight for government. This particular handshake actually came in and made my work easier. So now in Parliament, before the handshake, we had members of the opposition not coming to Parliament, not participating in parliamentary debate, not participating in appointments. Since the handshake, we actually have a full house working the way it's supposed to be. So as far as I'm concerned, the handshake actually came and made my work easier. So I didn't even know it was going to happen. You know, a lot of us saw it happen
So from where you're sitting, it is a step in the right direction.
It's a step in the right direction. I might not understand the intricate details of it, but it actually certainly is a step. I haven't met anybody who has said that this is a step in the wrong direction.
Okay. Honorable Kotuni, your thoughts on the list, and whether you also feel that despite the fact that you may not be privy to all that is going on, it is leading us in the right direction.
You know, there is this argument which is being propagated outside there, that no one is privy to what is going on. Uhuru and Raila, they made very clear what intentions they have. And they came up with 7 agenda, 7
building
points.
Bridges.
Yes, inclusivity, all those issues. So for anybody to claim that nobody knows what it is the intention of the committee or the handshake, it's a bit misleading. Uhuru and Raila, they are very aware of the challenges that the country has been going through. And it was after the election that Uhuru knew that he is the president of the people who elected him and the president of the people who opposed him. Like my friend here and me. After the election, we must impress everybody. The same people who voted for us and the same people who never voted for us. But you see, it only got people by surprise. Because the people in this nation, they are used to that once you win the elections, then you have it all. And when you lose, you go fighting. The same time for Raila, he has also realized that the nation is more important than him. You cannot continue fighting. And as time goes also, people get to live with the reality that for how long am I going to fight? The nation is more important.
So assuming, you've rightly mentioned that there was a statement signed by both the principals after the handshake, and this was to do with building bridges. Are you then satisfied or happy with the list? Now, especially like Mheshimiwa has mentioned, the youth are missing.
With the list that has been established, you start from somewhere. Then after that, they will give us the roadmap. I am also expecting that after this, they will also give us a roadmap on how they are going to engage other stakeholders. Because the main question that we should be asking ourselves is that the 14 advisory team, what are they going to do exactly? Then after that, then we'll say, those ideas which they are going to incorporate, that will also touch on the young people. That should be the main question. You see, there's been a lot of argument about young people being left out. But remember, the issues that are on the table, I will not say that young people, they are not ready to settle down and argue these issues. But through history, is that at least when you have very mature people, then that is the time you have a better framework of engagement and going forward. These are people who've matured. They are not being driven by motives. The constitution that we have today and many other policies that we've created in this nation, if you see any policy that was created by people who perhaps maybe at that time they thought they will take over after, they tend to create a policy or a constitution or an act of parliament that tend to suit them once they are in power.
Okay, so Mheshimiwa Ngunjiri Wambugu, your advice to Kenyans is that we just wait and hopefully see that this team is going to then follow that agenda. Because the jitters that are being caused, or rather that are coming up, is because there are already people who are feeling like they're not included.
You know, what Mheshimiwa is saying is, first and foremost, it's actually going to be very important for us to understand what the mandate of this group is.
Which
and that's what my point is. So far, we don't know. Remember, when we saw the handshake, we first didn't even know what the handshake was about. Then we read the statement. We saw the building bridges. Then we have watched what has been happening. We've listened to the president speak about it. We've listened to the former prime minister speak about it. We've listened to other politicians also speaking about it and other leaders from other sectors of society speaking about it. Now we've reached a point where the two people who are driving this process is the former prime minister and the president. And the reason they're driving this process is because they are the primary antagonists in the last election. The reason we're in this situation where we actually need to build bridges is that the last election created a split, a pretty massive split. So when you say we're building bridges, you're actually trying to bridge this side of the split and this side of the split. Each of them has a particular person who is the point person of that conversation. Now, these point people have decided with their own wisdom to put together a team of 14. And they have selected these 14 people based on what I assume they understand that is supposed to happen. Now, once this team has been unveiled, as we were just introduced to them, I'm expecting that the next thing we'll be told is now these guys are going to work on this aspect. Remember, building bridges cannot be done by 14 people. So it can't be done by 2, it can't be done by 14. It's going to require each and every member of the Kenyan society to plug into that space. So as Mheshimiwa Kutunyi said, this is a process. We are seeing a step. Then we are hoping this team is going to come up with a program of events, for example. And now the problem would be if they come up with a program of events that does not include youth or women or people living with disabilities, or because each of these are particular members of society. You need private sector there, you need civil society there. So my assumption is these 14 people, we remember all along we've had only 2 people working on this program, Ambassador Kimani and lawyer Paul Mwangi. Nobody has been complaining. Nobody has been saying we're not included. And it's been very consistent that the president and the former prime minister dedicated the responsibility of crafting a program to these 2. Now, these 2 have expanded to 14. So the team is now 16. But now you are hearing people saying, oh, how come so it's not there? It's a natural order of when things are starting to happen. So in my opinion, as I go back to my first point, let's first understand the mandate of this group. Then we can now criticize criticize it on whether or not the group has a good representation to actually deliver on the mandate of what they're supposed
All right,
to.
Honorable Kotunyu, one of the things that may be causing jitters is, of course, the thought that 2022 might be in play. And, of course, everybody's trying to put their pawns and their, chessboard in order. Is it too early to be playing that chess game for 2022 right now?
You see, politics is a continuous process. And unfortunately or fortunately, once the handshake happens, there are people who are too crafty and too clever to take advantage of a situation. And because of the mind of the nation that has been made to think that when I work closely with my friend here, then we have an agenda of a political agenda. So I think there are two things fundamentally that we cannot rule out. Of course, we will be very unfair to say that it cannot influence. The way Raila is trying to move with a handshake, of course, any political thinker will see a political move that Raila is trying to take every day. And it relates, someone might relate it to 2022. When I was here last year, you remember, when even these guys, they were very afraid to talk about the dialogue. We are the first people who propagated this idea of dialogue. But of course, the way it is happening now, it appears the political geography of NASA, it is being tilted or it is being affected. At the same time, the political geography of Jubilee, it is also being shaken. This is a matter of fact. Now, depending on if it is going to affect 2022, it depends on how the players are going to behave. Remember in 2005, 2007, 2008, 2010, and this one I always remind politicians to be very cautious. Because once politicians, they're elected, their interests also tend to change. And they tend also to bring players on board. I remember in 2007, 2010, when at that time there was ODM and then there was Kibaki on this other side, PNU. There was a lot of reaching out by PNU to our side. And it bears fruit eventually. It was at that time that people started fighting the good initiative that had been started to Kibaki, Rudi Nyumbani initiative. And then that time I will say that it was like also building bridges, people to go back to their houses. The people who ignore that gesture are the people who are in the opposition today. So I will say the people who might ignore the handshake and not embrace it fully, they might be in for a root shock in the future.
In the future.
Yes.
All right, and I want us to take a call.
Because you see, if the nation, if Kenyans realize that the handshake is giving them peace, if the handshake is reducing tension, if the handshake is also growing the economy, like the way it is doing now, at least there is peace in the nation. It is attracting investment. If you try to jeopardize that kind of initiative created by the leaders,
You're likely to be on your own.
It is survival for the fittest. You can easily be set aside by wananchi and be seen as a common enemy for the good of the nation.
All right, and let me take a call now from James Mamboleo. And James, thank you for joining us. He's a political analyst. James, you've been listening in to the conversation. First of all, your comments and possibly your thoughts on the fact that just the 14-member list is causing jitters, and the fact that it's not likely to be, even if, regardless of how expanded that list is, it may not satisfy everybody. James?
Yeah, let me first say that, one of the biggest reasons why people are reading a lot into the expansion of that list is because the handshake itself did not give a lot of information on what was actually happening between President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga. So right now you have a scenario in which the nation or Kenyans are trying to read some things into the expanded list so as to try and understand what it actually really means, which is going to be a bit difficult. Why? Because I am of that view that, the reason why Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga came together has nothing to do with any specific agenda for the Kenyans particularly, they understood, both of them, that, this country is under a lot of tension. Uhuru, as president, knew that he is not going to realize the benefits of his legacy term if the country continues being that way. But on the other hand, Raila Odinga came to this realization that he was going to go down as a man who has always fought, this intransigent fellow who never gives up any fight. So what they have done is basically come together as a first step, and then all the details of the handshake and whatever MOU they're going to have is going to develop as we go along. So the reason why you see a lot of people being so pesky about the list that you've seen is because people are trying to read in the names that you saw in that list and try and understand what exactly President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga agreed on.
All right, thank you, James. And coming back to studio, Honorable Wambugo.
Yes.
Looking at that list, and of course, like I mentioned earlier, it's not likely to be in favor of everybody and, regardless of how expanded it is. But one of the things that we must admit is that as Kenya, we've had a protracted problem of ethnicity and division after every election.
Yep.
Is this a team, or is this a solution that is hopefully going to help us be at a better place come 2022?
I want to believe that they are going to get us to a better place come 2022. But then, as my brother said, we really must remove 2022 from this particular conversation as a primary driver, because, of course, 2022 is going to come. I listened to the president and the former prime minister and the deputy president as well during the funeral for Matiba. And you get the feeling that, look, especially for the president and the former prime minister, the conversation of 2022 is irritating. This, it's
premature.
Yes. Why? Because, as a lot of people are saying, this conversation of the building bridges has not consolidated itself. When you introduce a conversation about an election, a divisive election, because for sure, 2022 is going to be a divisive election. I mean, every presidential election we've had in this country has been divisive. I always say that elections, by their very nature, are divisive. When I was running for Member of Parliament, there are people who voted for me, there are people who did not vote for me. So anytime you bring in a question about an election, then you're dividing people. Some people will prefer a certain candidate, others prefer a certain candidate. While when you bring that conversation into the middle of a process that is supposed to bring people together, then what you're actually doing is working against the intention of that process. And Kenyans must remember that between now and 2022, a lot of things are going to happen. Okay. Some that are even going to be even more divisive than 2022 by itself.
But what we must not forget, and I think that's a problem that we possibly have as Kenyans, is one of the reasons why the elections are that divisive. Number one is ethnicity.
Yep.
Two is electoral malpractice, or what is viewed to be electoral malpractice, perception of the election. So if those are not sorted out, then we possibly are going to be at the same place, because as much as I agree with you that elections are divisive, they become divisive and destructive when they're when the people feel that they are not free and fair.
My brother, elections are divisive everywhere. Look at Trump and Clinton. Look anywhere in the world. The minute Michael and Gunjiri are looking for votes from 100 people, you're going to split that 100 people.
You'll have supporters, I'll have supporters.
You're going to split that 100
Correct.
people. It doesn't matter how good the process is. So even just the takeoff point of an election is divisive. Then, of course, when you bring in the other situations that we are fighting for inclusivity, we have ethnic issues as an agenda, people feeling that the person who gets elected is my person, and if my person is not there, then I am not represented. And remember, we're in a country where you have 42 communities, then in a country where 7 of those communities represent 75 to 80% of the population, you're going to have a massive problem of that issue of inclusion. So divisiveness is going to be a factor of our politics for a while. I also come against the whole idea of that the reason we are divisive is because of perceptions of electoral malpractice and everything. When these two gentlemen shook hands, the country calmed down. And it brings me to the point of, if we are all so committed to electoral practices, does it mean that the minute they shook hands, the problem of electoral malpractice got finished?
No, it did not. But that means that come 2022, should that still play out, then we are likely to go back to where we were.
And the problem when we're going to have is that it means that every election is going to be a problem, and then the top protagonists are going to meet, sit down, shake hands, and the problem goes away. So, and this is why the Building Bridges project, as I look at it, has to be, and I expect it's going to be a multi-factorial project. It's going to have issues of why do the winners feel that the electoral process is okay, and the losers feel that it is not.
Okay. Honorable Kutu.
Yes. While I might agree with my good friend here partially, is that, you see, there is this issue of 2022 that vis-a-vis the handshake, vis-a-vis the 14 advisory team that people have created. I think what is very important is that we should be more discussing on what are these issues of inclusivity.
Correct.
What causes divisives? What causes, so relationship at the election? And I want to tell my friend that election is not divisive. It is the interest. Because you are pursuing your interest, I am pursuing my interest. I want to take you back to, other mature democracies, like in the United States of America. Some countries got independence 300 years ago, and they've gone through these stages. And if you go to their history, they've been fighting all those years before election. What happened? After every election, they try to sit down as leaders. Objectively, what are the people who say, what are the issues that separates us? And I think now this is what the country is doing. See what happened in 2007. It was serious. See what happened in 2013. It was somehow managed. See what happened in 2017. It was tension. And after some time, it settles. The leaders are trying to come together and say, wait a minute, what are we supposed to do as leaders so that we don't have this feeling after the elections? They're almost there. When you talk about inclusivity, when you talk about the malpractice in election, all these things, my brother, has to be undertaken through reforms. And I want to say here very clearly that some of the issues, 7 points that was agreed between Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila, you cannot agree on a table or when you are taking coffee. You must agree in principle, and you must go the whole length of even trying to enact it. If not law, be a policy. So I'm seeing a situation where the recommendations from this team might even form part to the constitutional amendment that people are talking. See the people who are opposing this thing, the handshake. There are some people who say Raila left us out. And if those are the members of parliament who are complaining, I will want to appreciate the deputy president for one reason. He ran away with the handshake and he said, this is the way to go. Because what is agreed with Raila and Uhuru, partly also William is included. And William is taking the lead, telling people that whatever it was agreed by Raila and his president
is the right way to go.
Exactly.
All right, let me hear from James Mamboleo before we release him. James, your comments so far on this list, and also whether it is helping us deal with some of those issues that made us divided as we were as a country at the point of elections, and seems to happen every single time we have elections. It's a cycle. James.
It's a very dangerous thing, Mike. Why? Because you have a scenario in which after every election, people are going to fight so hard, and then at some point, people are going to shake hands, and then the problem seems to go away. So since every time one part of the political divide is complaining about electoral malpractice, and the other one has power, then probably in the future, the one that has power is going to always say, let's make sure that I keep this guy out. And the one that does not have power is going to say, let me fight so hard after the election so that we get into a deal. So I think the thing that we should carry on from this particular discussion that is going on is to say, look, can we have a scenario in which now we sit down through this 14 or 16-member team and craft a well-intentioned program of addressing some of the issues that make Kenyans fight after 5 years after every presidential election. Now, if we are able to do that and people come to the table genuinely and present what they feel is that program which can actually get the country there, then we would have gotten it right. Otherwise, we have the risk of sinking into a cyclical problem in which every part of the divide knows that I will fight as much as I want because I know after every election, people can actually shake hands and then the problem seems to be solved for that particular moment. So the other thing that we should not divorce all this discussion from, of course, is 2022. There are those who want to view 2022 as being completely divorced from the program that you are seeing that is happening. But the truth of the matter is there are those in the NASA camp that are extremely unhappy with the process that is going on because they think that this is a calculation towards 2022 and they have been denied the opportunity to participate. And of course, there is that group, especially from the deputy president's side, which doesn't know yet how, in the scheme of things, the handshake is going to go and how it's going to affect 2022. So as we go forward, we want to ask both the president and the former prime minister to be careful because, as I told you earlier, at the beginning, what they understood was that, this fight is causing a lot of tension, and this tension is destroying a lot of things, including the economy and so on and so forth. Let us give to the Kenyan people a handshake first, and then later we will sit down, some group of people, and they will agree on how we intend to run this particular objective forward. So right now is their opportunity to come together and send a very clear message to the teams from either side and tell them that, you are not going to negotiate positions for people, but you are going to craft a program in which every Kenyan, when they go to elections, they feel represented in that election and they are happy with the election when it happens. Otherwise, if this becomes a team only to get some people happy by creating some positions so that, people are now in a hurry saying, let's change the constitution so that it can accommodate so and so.
Okay.
Inclusivity has never been a question of the Kenyan people. Inclusivity in most cases has always been a question. Do some boys from this particular part of Kenya sit at the table of a national discussion? That is not inclusivity, Mike.
All right. Thank you, James. Thank you, James Mamboleo. And remember, if you have any comments or something you'd like to mention, you can do that via social media. The Twitter handles are displayed as we carry on. Honorable Ngunjiri, this question of inclusivity, I think, could we have misunderstood it as Kenyans? Because even when you look at those possibly who are complaining about the 14-member list, when they talk about inclusivity, maybe what they mean is that my name is not there. But that is not inclusivity. When we're talking about inclusivity, we cannot have the 42 tribes represented at State House. That is not practical.
Yep.
So when we talk about inclusivity, could this be where we need to redefine inclusivity, number one? And number two, it would get rid of my man being there. Because the reason why I want Ngunjiri as my man there is because I feel he'll represent my personal interest as opposed to the interest of that particular constituency that you represent. Can we redefine inclusivity? What does it mean?
I think it's actually going to be maybe the responsibility or the work of our generation of leaders to take this country to the point where we understand, we have defined, understood, and accepted what inclusivity means. Because until we get there, then what's going to happen is that every community believes they're only represented if their person is in government, not as an employee, but as a person who is making decisions. It doesn't matter at what level. But if at some point you have a certain influence, then you're represented. I think for us as a country, we will have to create our own system of governance that first and foremost appreciates how we socialize, that we socialize from families to communities all the way moving upwards, and that takes into consideration all the expectations of those socialization groups. Because the reason, part of the problem I see us having, and Brother Kutunyi said it, we are trying to ape the political behaviors of countries that are 300 years old in the democracy. We are being judged on the standards set by countries like those. And one of the things I always laugh about is, when Trump won, guys are on the streets doing demos and burning effigies and everything. And you could see how difficult the Western media was, how they were struggling with that particular picture. Because to them, that happens in African states, So this is 300 years later in a democracy, and it's happening to them. They have their own mechanisms of how they deal with it. We need to figure out our mechanisms. Right now, our mechanism is handshakes. From 2007, handshake was done. In 2013, there was like a certain, you could feel there was a certain acceptance of how it's working. Then what we need to ask ourselves as a country is, when we finish elections, what are the primary interest blocks that must be represented in every government for the government to function, for that government to be felt to be inclusive? And these interest blocks are not always necessarily ethnic, whether it is capital, whether it is youth, whatever it is. We as a country, and maybe over the next part of the Building Bridges conversation, needs to be that. And then once we get to the bottom of that, then if it means we must change our constitution,
then we go that way.
To fix that particular problem and incorporate those interests. So that, for example, my personal opinion is that I have analyzed the problems we have as a country, and I keep thinking, 7 communities. We have 7 communities that represent 75 to 80% of the population of this country. Our current structure of government means that at any given time, you have 2 of them in the executive, and the rest either outside the executive or just operating as opposition or something. We'll need to think about it, because for as long as we think of ourselves as communities, if I am thinking as a Kikuyu and Kutunyi is thinking as a Kalenjin, there's a guy thinking as a Meru.
Ngunjiri,
Yes.
You're the politicians who keep antagonizing and building your political capital on tribes or regions.
There's a part of us that wants to believe that. But let me tell you something about politicians. Politicians operate on the lowest common denominator. So when you go into a certain space and you find that people are saying, we are organized like this, the average politician will walk with the path of where people are already organized.
Where they already are.
Where they're already organized. And then you pick that and shape it. A lot of the problems we have in this country are politicians who have picked an existing problem and mainstreamed it, not generated it. We keep blaming politicians and saying, whether it's corruption or what. But let's be very honest. The politicians we have are products. There's no politician who comes from another country. They're products of our society. So as a society, we need to come to the point where we accept there is a conversation we need to have about ethnicity, for example.
All right. Kotuny, are we doing too many things at the same time as a country? And by that, what I mean is we have a proposal to that the former Prime Minister gave the other day during the devolution conference of having 14 regions. We also have a proposal or a narrative that we need to have an expanded executive to be all-inclusive, so that during elections, those who possibly do not win, despite the fact that they have huge numbers, have a place, which we don't seem to have. Then now we already have the 14-member that we are not quite clear what they're doing. There's so many things happening.
First of all, you remember, after the handshake, there were many people who were saying, so what after? So what about it? Now it has a 14-member committee has been established. After the 14-member has been established, they are going to look into those issues that I had said earlier, including its inclusivity. But of course, there is also the argument that we cannot wish we can't wish it away. The argument of the constitution. Raila is propagating his own idea of a 3-tier system government. But you see, at the same time, we must be talking about what exactly suits this nation.
Yes.
And I want to ask a very genuine question to the nation as a young leader. And at least we've been around now for a very long time. The question is, you have Tuju in government, you've got Omamo in government, and many other senior officials. But people still talk about being excluded from the government. Today you talk about Eugene Wamalwa, talk about many other people who are in government, but there is a section of people who will say we are excluded from the government. Now, what is the question here? Again, you have Uhuru as the president. You have William Ruto in the government. People say it is our government. It means, and I will always blame the people who say that we are reformist. We have never really understood what is the main principle that is holding this country together. And that is a fact that we must address. If it is ethnicity or regionalism, can we address this thing and make it part of our structure in government to address these issues? And I want to go back a little bit. When Moi was in government, apart from 1992 and many other, and few other incidences, at least you could see a bit of stability. When we had an hybrid system of Kibaki and Raila for 5 good years, there was a lot of things that moved on. The constitutional framework, there was amendment, there was the milestone, the 2010 constitutional that was established. So what is this thing that we are missing today that they almost got it that time? We must relook into the kind of leadership that we have. Is it the leadership or the structure of government that appreciates the principal value of our nation? In this nation, for the nation to be stable, you must have 2+. The antagonism that we have now is because the people believe that it is only 2 communities which are in power. The rest of the communities have been left out. Kenyans, they've been made to believe that it's the elected class that makes decision. It is not the appointed class. Then why don't we address that? How do we address it? We address it by looking into the structure, not the kind of leaders that we elect. Yep. Today, the Rift Valley, which was a boiling point, which was a field for fight, because we are in government today, we've never had differences. At least now it is going for 10 years, and after election. So does it mean that the structure of government is limiting inclusivity? And this is the discussion that we must discuss. And I want to say that Raila on the 2-3-tier system of government got it wrong. We should be talking about if these positions Uhuru get it. And this is something I want to talk as Kutunyi, not even as a member of parliament. And someone who's been around for some time. If William there, Ruto is there, and Kenya, and people in Rift Valley have got peace. If Duale is there, and people from minority feel represented, what is that else that we are missing for these other communities to feel that they are represented?
And what do you feel is that is missing?
And for me, I think we need to go hybrid system. Hybrid system kind of government is good for this nation, where you've got the president with his own responsibility, who will the power as usual. You've got his own vice president, who deputizes the president. And of course, these are the positions. Members of parliament, and this is what we had said, should be coming, the cabinet secretary should be coming from elected leaders, so that minority communities who cannot be in the 4 or 3 positions, like the president, the vice president, and any other senior position, then they can be also feel represented. Why is it that today we give a position to somebody, a flag, but the community doesn't feel that we are represented? And for a very long time, you know, people are pretending. People don't want to talk the truth. I think even the so-called scholars, even the media, even the political class, we must swallow our pride, address the real issues.
All right, and address the real issue.
Yes.
Do you agree that that's a real issue? We need to relook at our structures and possibly redo them so that everybody can feel that they are all included.
I completely agree with it, because, you know, Mheshimiwa Kutunyi has raised a very important point. This particular government has a representation of very many communities. But, and this was the frustration in the first term. Every time you had serikali ya kabila mbili, and then you'd ask yourself, so you have Richard Omamo, who is Luo. But you'd listen to the Luos and they're like, this serikali si yetu. And you're like, okay, so why is it that they don't feel like this is their government, despite the fact that the Minister of Defense is from their community? So it's because of that issue of elected versus appointed. The assumption that I want to be part of the people who is appointing people. My person must be there making a decision about where people are appointed. If we are being given positions that are appointed by people who are elected, then we're not part of that argument. And this point of agreeing that we must very seriously, candidly look at what it is, how we organize, and then make our constitution suit that. This thing of we must stop trying to come up with an ideal constitution and then trying to make us fit into it. We must first accept this is the reality of who we are. You know, one of the things I like about Kagame is this thing he keeps saying, that African countries must find the systems of governance that work for them. We must stop being told to be like this or like that. Even in Kenya, we sit down and tell ourselves, we need a government that has 5 positions in the executive. whether they are elected universal suffrage or others are, some are elected through parliament, it doesn't matter. But if what is going to give our country stability is the fact that we have 3, 4 or so people recognized. Because remember, like right now, the country is calm. We have not given Raila any executive position. But the fact that the president recognized him, and you know, that's what that handshake was. Eh? The handshake was nothing else but the president recognizing me and the deputy have legal mandate to be the president of this country. You have all these other people who are upset with us, and you represent them. Come, let us talk. The minute they did that handshake, the country stabilized. Why? Because now everybody felt, okay, now if those 3 people are speaking, then a lot of us are represented. Okay. So we need to ask ourselves, does it then mean we need a government that has at least 3 people, or 4, or 5?
Just
Whatever
to be
it is,
fair,
I'm
just
not sure.
to be fair to the exact.
And I want us to wind up. So as you do that,
Yes.
your closing comments, but also maybe what you expect from the State of the Nation address tomorrow.
But just to be fair to the Kenyans, I want to tell them that there's been an argument of either have a parliamentary system or a presidential system. The two will never work in this country.
Yes.
And I will repeat it again. We say this presidential system was not going to work. For the people who say that maybe we were not getting it right, today now they can agree with us. The people who are propagating the parliamentary system, it can never work because Kenyans want to also the universal suffrage. They want to exercise the universal suffrage where the president must be elected. So I am seeing an hybrid system where we might even go to Tanzania model, where the president, once you've been elected, then of course you have your vice president. Then the president, you can appoint a prime minister and they do deputies. And the members of parliament, cabinet comes from members of parliament. That will ensure stability in this country. Now, the idea that people talk about what exactly happened with the leader of opposition. I will want a leader of opposition, an office fully fledged established. So then Raila could be enjoying some perks in the nation. He has a fully fledged secretariat as the leader of opposition. And your statement is an alternative government where you have also an opportunity to appoint shadow cabinet ministers. Then this is the time we will have stable democracies. And of course, since they are going to come from members of parliament, it is easy for them also to table their side of the idea. If it is the budget, I expected the shadow cabinet to say, this is the budget that we want, we are thinking. Yes, so once you have this, everybody will feel included. Because many people think that maybe Raila will become the prime minister, or some people think that, you see, then where do you put the opposition? We must have strengthened the opposition. So then when they lose, or when you lose elections, then you know you have a responsibility and you must be respected and you are recognized. On the State of the Nation, of course, I expect obvious tightening up of this issue of handshake. I expect more on the roadmap.
Should we expect, yes, more of the roadmap? And
roadmap, of course, you know, building bridges. We expect those. Of course, we expect the other issues, including food security. But I think the fundamental issue that is going to be put across by the president is how now the 14 team, how long is it going to work? Yes. So, but I want to appeal to the rest of the leaders, everybody else, that it is the time to sit down and we relook into the structure that is causing problems in this.
Honorable Ngunjiru, your closing comments.
First, on the issue of the State of the Nation, I do agree with Honorable Kutunyi that I expect that we're going to be told a lot more about the Building Bridges program. We are going to be hopefully given a roadmap. Given the idea and the concept behind this whole idea, because if we don't understand where they were coming from, then we're going to have this conversation about whether it's about 2022 and why there are no young people. I want to imagine that because the president is serving his last term, former prime minister is advanced in years in terms of the politics he's done, it's easier for them to make a much more far-reaching decision on where it is that we need to be doing, and it's easier for them to deal with hard questions, including about structure, without it affecting their political careers. So I do expect that that's going to happen. I also expect a breakdown of the big four. We have spoken about the big four. We know we are doing manufacturing, food security, housing, and healthcare. I'm looking at a presentation by the president about what he expects Parliament to do to make the big four reality. The laws that he's looking at us to change, whether it's on the National Hospital Insurance Fund, whether it's on taxes for people who build houses for private sector. I'm expecting that that's also going to be part of what is going to be coming up tomorrow when the president comes.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Honorable Gunjiru Wambugu and Honorable Joshua Kotunyi for joining us this morning on The Political Point. And that's where we wind up this segment of the show. And we take a short break. When we come back, we'll be looking at more stories that are making headlines, but also we'll be looking at entrepreneurship. And today being Labor Day, I think that is a conversation that we must have, because at the end of the day, your labor would like to reflect on your pocket. It's now 4 minutes after 8. We take that break.